start the meeting as early on time as possible. Only in fairness to everybody else who arrives. So I know we all get caught traffic and other obligations. So let's go ahead and begin. I ask John if he would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, has the agenda been posted?
It has, Mr. Chairman?
Okay, Nadia, roll call.
Commissioners Altman excused. Merriman,
Present.
Breslin, Call,
Here.
Clarkson,
Here.
Corcoran,
here.
Dada excused. Freeman,
Yep.
Patrick,
Here.
Hearn,
Here.
Hughes, here. King,
Here.
Pattison, Pye,
Here.
Reason,
Here.
Schmitz,
Here.
Square, and Jones.
Here. All right, acceptance of the agenda. If you've had a chance to take a look at it, any additions, corrections, you're okay moving forward with the agenda as it is? All right, we need a motion after that, all right. Accept the agenda, we do.
I make a motion. Second.
Second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, any public comments? All right, no public comments, no one's asked to speak this morning. Okay, approval of the minutes for our our April 10th meeting. You have the minutes in your packet. You've had a chance to review them. Has everyone had a chance to review? Any additions, corrections?
Move to approve.
Second. Okay, we have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No, I was not here.
Okay, you do abstention. So we mark keeping on here as an abstention as opposed to a opposition. Okay. Very good. Okay, we get to my report now. There could be a likelihood that we might go to beyond 8 o'clock this morning. Might as well tell you up front in case you need to make some phone calls to let people know you might be ready.
We're at the race now.
Just to be ready now. I think last time we went an hour and a half, which was unusual for us, but we had a lot of work, and we had a lot of work this morning too, doing the budget and the operations committee report and a few other items. As we began last week, I've asked, again, 3 commissioners to take 2 or 3 minutes to introduce themselves. I think it was very helpful last week. We had 3. So I've asked, we'll start with Kathleen, and then Kevin, and then Ms. Perryman. Kathleen,
I'm Kathleen Hughes. I represent the city of La Quinta. My airline background was 27 years with the airline. As most women at the time, I started as in flight services and flight attendant. But very quickly, I realized I had much more interest in why were the passengers on board that aircraft? Why did they choose that airline? So I made the transition and went for an international career, went for Air New Zealand and for Australia. And I went into week sales reservations. From there, I went to sales representative, then to sales manager, and then really found my home in the MICE market and was the MICE manager for the Americas, both North and South America. The MICE market, if you're not familiar, is your meetings, your incentives, your conferences, and your events. This was a fabulous job. I really, really enjoyed it. It gave me the opportunity to work with a lot of corporations who are moving large groups, incentive programs, taking entire aircrafts or even chartering aircrafts to destinations around the world. In addition, it was a time of a lot of sporting events were going on that time. There was everything from America's Cup to World Cup to, of course, the Sydney Olympics. Because of my background as a competitive gymnast, I was in charge of the airline. The airline for the Sydney Games was ANZA Australia and Air New Zealand. And so we carried very, very heavy traffic down to the Sydney Games. In dealing with the charters and with Sydney Games and any event, America's Cups, anything of that size, you're really working closely with your operations department as well. You're landing aircraft in areas you may not even have landing rights in. You're working with customs. You're working with unions, everything to try to get from A to B very, very smooth transitions. charge of moving a lot of people together. The risk management factor really kicked in, and in the Americas, you were no longer taking entire aircrafts and had to move people. So I took an early retirement and we moved here.
Thank you, I appreciate hearing about that background. I wasn't quite know about the extent of that, Kevin, you're next up.
Good morning. My name is Kevin Corcoran. I'm a sales and marketing consultant. I've lived here for 16 years. My career started with Procter & Gamble. I worked in sales and marketing in their institutional sales division. I was with them in Cincinnati and Chicago and San Francisco. And I left there and I joined a consulting division of Xerox called Xerox Learning Systems, which is the largest sales and management training company in the world. I had an 18-year career with them. In sales and sales and marketing, and my final position there was Senior VP of Sales and Marketing. We dealt with organizations who were trying to improve the effectiveness of their salespeople and also the relationship between salespeople and their customers. I had an opportunity to start my own company in '97, which dealt with customer experience and sales effectiveness. That got the eye of a variety of software companies, and we were acquired by a company called Onyx Software in Seattle, which was a CRM, customer relationship management company. And we merged our consulting capabilities with their software capabilities. After working for them for 3 years, finishing a contract in Seattle, I moved here. And since then, since I moved here in 2003, I have had the benefit of consulting with companies, large and small, Microsoft and others, on this whole area of customer experience and how customers choose, make decisions, how sales organizations, marketing organizations influence customer decisions. So it's been an interesting business, kind of an insight into why people make choices they do and how companies can go and influence those decisions. One of my other mantras after I quasi-retired was to start a travel company. And so I produce high-end cruises for PBS and NPR donors. PBS was a client of mine, Region 7 Seas, a luxury cruise line was a client of mine. For 15 years, we produce cruises for PBS donors, and we bring different speakers and lecturers on board. We do that 4 or 5 times a year. We're the highest rated cruises on Region 7 Seas. And all this is for PBS and NPR. Some of that work is spilled over to work I do locally. We do certain events at the museum involving speakers. We work with Eisenhower and trying to work with their donors, doing special things for donor relations. I've made a variety of investments in small businesses here, helped raise the money for Tropical, for COPA, Destination PSP, help those guys get off the ground. So I'm really committed to local business here and trying to see how things matter. And why the airline commission? I'm almost 10 million miles on American. I live on that airline and have a point of view being a customer, and we have a real passion for living here and everything we can do to make this a positive experience for people who visit, and selfishly for business people like myself who use this airport all the time. So that's my story.
Thank you, Kevin, that's very helpful. I can't imagine 10 million, I'm just short of 2 million on money airline. I can't even imagine 10.
They have a C with his name on it.
Yeah, that's see with your name. All right, Robert Berryman.
Hi, my name is Bob Berryman. This will be my second to the last meeting. I've been 2 terms in Indian Wells, and so next month will be my final. Let's see, I'm currently retired. My background is really unusual, at best. Started out, actually I'll go back, as a young child and a teenager, my dad thought he was the flying fisherman. So World War II guy and flying, so I grew up flying, small planes. Then as an adult, joined the California Highway Patrol. Was an instructor at the academy, worked pretty much all over the state. But ended up, and where I really wanted to be was in air operations. I was in air operations in Auburn, California. Fixed wing, working mostly speed enforcement and then search and rescue up in this area. I retired, and then when 9/11 came along, I applied to TSA, and they hadn't really hired. There was 12 people involved in TSA at that time. Thinking I would never get hired by the federal government, I was gone about 1 week. I was in Oklahoma City. very first federalization of Baltimore Airport. And I worked all over the East Coast, opening up airports as far as TSA went. And then it came time I had to settle down somewhere at the end of that, and it turned out to be, I think, Palm Springs. I had some offers. When I came to Palm Springs in 2002, there were 2 lanes to the checkpoint. We made a third out of the supervisor's station. And fell in love with Palm Springs from that point. Then I started promoting. I ended up later in San Diego, and then at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. I did switch to the regulatory side after a while, and that's where things get a little unusual. Is my job was to circumvent security measures in airports and airlines. So I can't talk about a whole bunch of it, but I was either a very popular guy because everybody did well, or I was a very unpopular guy because things didn't go well. I retired, and by accident found myself as manager of Bermuda Dunes Airport for about 3 years, and here I am.
Great, I had no idea about the experience with TSA. So I'm finding this helpful. I hope the rest of you are too, to learn more about it. We're doing this at the request of several of you, which is a good request. Just one quick announcement here. The operations committee, I guess, Kathleen, you asked to be taken off the operations committee
Right, due to time.
due to time constraints. And then the chair has asked Peter to be to join that, so I'm appointing Peter to replace Kathleen to the operations committee. And then one quick observation, and then we'll move forward. The committee structure's been working very, very well. The operations committee met this week. We've had the budget, we've had marketing, we've had the noise committee, we've had everything else. And I just wanted to share my delight in how well the committee structure is working, because that's the level at which the issues get really vetted in detail, and then it comes back to the full commission so that we don't have to spend the entire time, because we trust one another and those in the committees. So we're going to be hearing from the operations committee today on the whole issue of concessions, and they really went into that in some detail. So I just wanted to report back that I personally, as chair of the commission, I'm really appreciative of the work and the time and the commitment that you're making, and the dedication to the committee structure, because that's really what's making us move ahead, I think, in very positive ways. With that, I'd like then to move to the next item of introductions and presentations.
Norm King has been a public servant a good portion of his career, and he has served the Airport Commission from June 13 to 19 here. So Norm, I think everybody appreciates, I particularly do, you served as chairman for a period of time. It was a pleasure to work with you. The floor is yours, and then I'd like you to accept this.
Norm has asked a few minutes here to share some reflections, so the floor is indeed yours, and take your time.
Well, thank you very much, Al, for the time, and I will reflect a bit here. I came to Palm Springs city manager in January 1980. I've been city manager of Claremont for a few years. There have been a few changes. First change occurred in the first month and a half. We had the big flood, which had actually more damage than the more recent flood. We had to evacuate Andreas Hills, 3,000 people. Of course, there were only 2 bridges in Palm Springs at that time, too, both on then 111 now. So that was my introduction. And then in September of the same year, we had the biggest fire ever, and that covered the entire area from over past Vista Chino, all through the Indian Canyons over into here, over a 3-week period of time. Only once did it threaten the city, but there was a hell of a lot of soot in the air for a year. And of course, our flat roofs with the winds didn't help, because you got reminded the entire year that you'd had a fire 10 months before because of the settled there. That was a pretty big thing. The largest fire in the United States for several years. In fact, I'd come to Palm Springs area in 1966 when I was just out of doing a program called the Cora Foundation out of undergraduate school the year after I graduated. And I had a report that I was contracted for by the citizens in the city of Palm Desert to do an incorporation study for the city of Palm Desert, spring of 1966. One of the areas that included, there were several study areas, included what is now all of Rancho Mirage, La Quinta, Indian Wells, Palm Desert. Total population at that time was 10,000 people or so in that entire area. Well, Palm Springs, I recommended the large area, but of course, if that had come to pass, many of you wouldn't be here today. So you have to thank whatever happened to Palm Desert, La Quinta, Rancho Mirage, and so on to incorporate separately. And the irony was, Palm Desert was the last of those to incorporate, 10 years after, I think, Indian Wells. But I was long gone by then. But it was a good introduction. And that's also where I met Frank Bogert, Mayor Frank Bogert. He was mayor 1958 to 1967 or so for the first time. Never thought I'd see him again. He, by the way, was responsible for the fountain out in front of the airport. Went to Mexico. Of course, he was his second wife, who's just walked out of cancer, was an attorney and still lives in Palm Springs from Mexico. He spoke fluent Spanish. He went to Mexico and many times and contracted for that fountain. Frank was, well, let me talk first just briefly about, many of you are aware of this, the fantastic changes that occurred in the 1980s in Coachella Valley. When I came in 1980, Palm Springs had a monopoly mentality, never thinking there could be any threat to its economic base. And then, of course, the down valley export of investment started to occur. At the time, the only thing that, it seemed pretty obvious to me, being an outsider, but also seeing the success of particularly Mission Hills, which was the first big development in the sand. People didn't think with the wind and sand you'd ever get any investment down valley. But of course that was coming. It came in a storm. It was not an easy time for Palm Springs in the 1980s. I was there for about 11 years. But it was also a fun time because things were really happening. One of the big things that occurred right before I came in the late 70s was the Carter administration giving the tribal council, the right to essentially veto city council on land use issues, and that set the stage for all kinds of dynamics, which many of you are familiar with, particularly in Palm Springs. And I haven't talked to David, but I was delighted to see yesterday's article about the tax situation. I mean, that is really important. At least there's beginning to be some limitation of what now have been, in my opinion, vastly overstated sovereignty rights of the tribe. And if they had won that one, looks like they're going to lose it. That would really affect the City of Palm Springs and our school district and some of the other cities.
It had to do with taxing.
Right, yeah, in terms of they were, well, not the time to make Gary, but
Yeah.
it's an interesting issue. Frank Bogert was the most interesting character I've ever met, even more than Sonny Bono, who came along right after him. He was also someone who could insult everyone, no matter who you were, and you would enjoy it. I've never met anyone who was people could be so comfortable with after meeting him just for 1 minute. He was an extraordinary person. And he knew everybody. He knew Albert Einstein personally. They asked him not too long before he died when he met Gene Autry. He said, I was in a rodeo that Gene ran in Ogden, Utah in 1930 because he was a cowboy. Frank still had his dad's saddle, who came from Brooklyn to be a cowboy after being born right before the Civil War. And he also was in the acting school with Lucille Ball, a lifelong friend, because he has stories and stories and stories. Will Rogers, the first time he said I ever cried as an adult was when I heard he was killed in an airplane crash in Alaska. This is now the later 40s. And he'd been at a party with Frank Sinatra at Will Rogers' home 2 weeks before that occurred. Well, which is one story. There's so many Frank stories, but the La Quinta people will appreciate this. At the time, in the late 30s, there was probably nothing there except the La Quinta Resort, as it was called, Frank Capra. But Frank and a buddy and a couple of others somehow got a hold of a private aircraft. This is sometime in the 30s. Kind of unusual then. And they knew some of their other buddies were camping out on horseback up here in the hills. So they thought it'd be fun to fill the plane with horse manure and go bomb their buddies who were camping. Well, they said, well, we didn't know about this trajectory, and it turned out that they pretty much wiped out the swimming pool around the hotel, for which I guess Frank Capra never forgave Frank. I can understand that, he could too. One more story, when Frank was mayor in the 60s, Prince Philip came to the airport, landed at the airport, and Frank dutifully went out and met him. Well, in the 80s, sure enough, Prince Philip comes back. And so Frank puts on his best cowboy hat and bolo tie and goes to the airport to meet Prince Philip. Prince Philip gets off the plane and says, oh, same old mayor. Of course, Frank said, same old Prince. And that's a validated story. Well, then came Sonny Bono, and Sonny, gave me a chance. Been here 8 years, I was part of the establishment, it was clearly times were changing. He ran against the establishment, never made a personal issue. He did agree to have lunch with me before the election, as long as we wouldn't be seen together, which I totally understood. And it took several weeks at least to begin to establish dialogue after he was elected. And people always ask me, well, what was Sonny like? And I said, well, Sonny was always late. He was always changing direction. He was honest, he was sincere, he was great for the city. And besides that, he was one of my 2 votes when I needed 3 when they fired me about 2 years later when we got a new city council in. And so he was always a good friend and good for the city in a very unusual way. I've never met anyone like him in terms of how he could think. Totally street smart. No theoretical bone in his body. Totally street smart. He, of course, had the idea of establishing a film festival, and I don't know how many times we went into Hollywood in that first year before the first event to put it together, and it worked. And now it's obviously spun out to a nonprofit with the city participation. But that first year it was all city and all Sonny, and a lot of trips, a lot of meetings, a lot of risks, but it worked. And then one other thing that occurred, Palm Springs was pretty provincial, and Sonny and I, we played some tennis at his place, and we were sitting around afterwards, and one thing led to another, and we got to thinking, well, maybe we shouldn't just have the Palm Springs Convention Bureau, and let's see, what about a greater Palm Springs Convention Bureau? So we got to work on it, and Sonny was a good salesman, and he sold it. That actually probably led to some extent the reason I was asked to leave, because at that point there was kind of a revolt of the quote, small hotels who did not want to do this, so that was part of my baggage. But it was, I think, really good for the valley as it has worked out. Just a couple of final things about the airport. When I came in 1980, the baggage area had a roof, but it had no walls on the street side, so it was totally open. And that was important because I'd gone on a fishing trip up in Alaska and brought back some halibut, I thought, packed in ice or dry ice. But so my baggage came, but my halibut didn't. So 2 days later, I get a call from someone at the airport and said, there's something leaking at the airport. So that was my halibut, and I think I was able to salvage it at the time. But it was just sitting in the heat, because obviously it wasn't air conditioned at that time. Ed Colby I inherited Ed Colby as the airport director, one of Tom's successors, or predecessors. And Ed was old school, interesting guy, but he was also a good shot. And that was really important because there was no fences around the airport then, and there were a lot of coyotes. So I know it was politically incorrect, but Ed was instrumental in keeping passengers safe for a while because shooting was the only option, basically. Then there was Prop 13, which occurred a couple of years before I came in '78, but we were all feeling the effects. So I had this great idea. Of course, I was wearing David's hat, and that we put an in lieu tax, property tax, on the airport operations, which we also did in the golf course, which worked well. We were getting a fair amount of money. It was in lieu property tax, as if it were private enterprise, and therefore should pay taxes like everybody else. But then Mayor Reardon of LA got elected, LA City, and he was trying to use, or he did use, airport funds for general purpose police, which is really pushing it. And the federal auditors came to LA, and then they somehow came out here, and that ended the in lieu tax when they came. So the airport's better off for it, the city's a little worse off for that. And I always blame Mayor Reardon for that. Alamo car rental, that was a big issue because they were off-site, and they refused to pay what we would charge it off-site, because the others obviously pay the rental site, but also for use of the airport. And they calculated their total due per year was about $130, because that was the amortized cost of the airport's pavement that they used to drive around to pick up people or have their cars go. And they introduced a bill in the state legislature that would allow that accounting formula to apply. Well, we fought it, and we were successful, but it was a big issue for a whole year because that would have set in motion a whole bunch of things that would not have been good for the airport, or other airports for that matter. One of the last things which is in process, just started with the discussions that led to the Air Museum lease. And the Bono Terminal, I know Tom just loves the design of the concourse. I had no part of the design, but we were instrumental in getting the law changed to allow, as we've talked about here from time to time, that is the bonding on the passenger fee that allows us and other airports now to bond ahead for those events. Just briefly, some other things that occurred during this time in the 80s. Even though it was economically stressful with all the new investment, new hotels down the valley and so on, we did a lot of infrastructure again. And the thing I was proudest of, I think, of all was the convention center, which was no easy trick to pull off at that time. And again, we had to deal with changing federal legislation. There's all kinds of stories about that. Frank and I spent 2 years in a row, the last day of the year, at Biltmore Hotel auditorium, the ballroom, with tables laid out, because we had something like 10,000 signatures to condominiumize the entire project, which was with the hotel and the convention center. First time it had ever been done. But we literally spent all day, 2 years in a row, because financing didn't go through the first year, decided to do that. We also totally rebuilt the sewer plant. It was the first airport expansion. Of course, Don Wexler, who designed the original building here, is still alive, and we worked with him to do the first expansion, a very small one compared to what's been done since. New police station, new city yards. The Tacos Debris Basin was finally underway and completed about 1991, which protects Palm Springs. And we then had some new bridges, Ramon, Sunrise, Gene Autry, but they didn't exist. And of course, Tom's favorite infrastructure project, the cogeneration plant, and David's too, which we put in, which at the time made a lot of sense. And obviously it's had some issues, but it did save the money, at least for a long time. So anyway, I'm sorry it takes so long. I appreciate Al's time. Today I'm probably finishing my public service career, which started when I came out of graduate school in Philadelphia in 1967 as an administrative assistant, actually intern in the city of Ontario. So 52 years later, I can honestly say that I'd do it all again, except there were some city council meetings where I probably wouldn't have said that at the time, but I do now. And I really want to thank David and the city staff and Tom and the airport staff for all the support, all your good work. And particularly, especially thank all you commissioners for your commitment to this airport. And particularly those of you who represent other cities. When the city council changed the commission to expand it to what we are now, to include so-called non-Palm Springs representatives, I had my concerns. This occurred well after I left. Those concerns have been completely dispelled by seeing how seriously you do take this assignment and how your different perspectives make the product better. And so anyway, thanks to everybody, and thanks for the time, and best wishes.
That was, thank you very much for that, Mark. Thank you for the years of service. It's an inspiration to the rest of us. So we move on here, let's see, where are we to? That's all the introductions and presentations, was it not, sir?
It was.
Okay, now to the city manager report.
I yield my comments back to Norm King. Chairman, I have nothing specifically to add, and I think Norm summed it up quite well.
Okay.
Well said.
Thank you, David. Then we go to the budget and finance report. Tom?
We actually, Mr. Chairman, have airport budget as an item, so I would suggest we just bypass.
Okay, all right. Then let's move on to the discussion.
Exciting, Mr. Chairman, very much.
Are we going to the next item?
We're going to the next item.
Yes, we are.
And in respected time, we promised everyone would be out here by 8 o'clock.
Yeah, more like that. But anyway, so the discussion and action items.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Tom.
But the good news is we got bids on our ticketing project. We pre-qualified 4 contractors. In the course of that bid process, though, 2 of them contacted us and said, we're too busy, can't do it, it's too small. So the result was, with the economy revving up and construction companies, we were seriously concerned about getting bids. We received 2 bids, and the estimate was lower than what came in. The actual bid was $32,360. The estimate was about $4 million less than that. And I think that was a product of the supply and demand. They feel if they're going to do their job, they're going to bid it higher. We had three alternative things in there, a carousel, extra carousel, which the airlines were interested in, and an auxiliary office space, which would be a modular building, and the third would be the TSA checkpoint. This is very important. I want you to focus in on that. You remember prior to last season, the epiphany that we were really constrained at the checkpoint. The city manager had ordered us to find solutions, short and long term, which we fully agree with, and we came up with a longer term project which would do a lot of things and add up to 8 lanes. Okay, we've got a short-term plan with 6 lanes, but this would be 8 lanes, and the consensus is we don't want to get caught off guard in years to come, and we'll probably proceed with that. Soft costs will be the construction management, $760,000. Here are those modifications to phase 1 I talked about, adding that. I'm really moving through a lot of stuff here to say. And unforeseen conditions, we're going to put an estimate of about 10% for contingencies, for the probability of that. We're seriously looking at deducting alternate 2 for the modular space. We think it's overpriced. If we get into a pickle later down the road, we think that we could easily find a modular for less price. I'll be introducing shortly here our PFC expert. So the funding of the project, PFC, FAA only allows so much to be eligible for PFC. They don't allow airline ticket space and other revenue generating things to be funded. So we maximize that. You remember a year ago we went through that process, got the approval for it. AIP grants is the same thing, entitlement funding, about $7 million. And that's very important, only for eligible portions of it, public space and baggage makeup. And then local funds, we figure about $6,700,000. What's very important about this is that you recall in our PFC program, we had talked about engineering where that PFC would reimburse the airport $4 million. Actually, it's over $4 million. So the good news is that 6.7 minus the 4, the net real capital funds would only be about $3.5 million. So with that being said, I'm going to introduce, well, here's that payback. Pay as you go, as we collect PFCs, we'll be reimbursing the airport for that. That'll help along the way. Okay, I don't know if I want to rehearse the PFC project, Norm. I think you talked about it a little bit. But first in the country, Suzanne, you can warm up and maybe come on up here. By the time you get up, I'll zip through this. But we have a current 450. We had that approved. We're going to continue with that. Now, I talked about the funding, the grant breakdown. Mark, I know you had a lot of information under. I'm not sure it's relative. We get into the project too. But I think the purpose, Mr. Chairman, of this is to talk about the bond financing. We are now done with the bid, and now we're segmenting, we're running parallel with the bond financing. Suzanne Harrow is the city's consulting expert on the bonds. Come on up and provide us an assessment of where we are and what the next steps are.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to the meeting. Now the bids are in, and we know how much PFC bonding capacity the FAA has approved for the airport. We can kind of finalize the bond sizing and the repayment terms of the bond. And so between the $22.6 million of construction funding, the bonds will also fund a $2.5 million reserve fund, which is security for bondholders in case something happens to your PFC revenue stream, employments drop for unexpected reasons, and to pay the cost of issuance. So we're expecting about a total of $25 million in bonds to be issued, payable solely from PFC revenues on an annual basis, leaving surplus every year to hopefully reimburse your $4.5 million over that 3-year period that Tom had in his original slide. If employments continue to grow, that might be reimbursed within 2 years instead of 3. And then we'll also provide you for some annual pay-as-you-go PFC project funding in case you have local matches that are eligible for PFC funding and can get reimbursed in future years. The total repayment time required for the $25 million bonds is approximately 13 years, 12 to 13 years. And if employments grow in accordance with the projections of your feasibility consultant, it's likely that the bonds will be paid off by 2026 from excess PFC PFCs. Since it's kind of a closed loop, you can only spend the PFCs on PFC approved projects. If you don't have any additional approved projects, any surplus just goes to start to pay down the bonds over time. So the estimated interest rate is probably somewhere a little bit north of 3%. So it's a good time to borrow money. And so even though the bids maybe came in a little bit more than estimated, the financing costs have gone down, so that's good news. And I'm happy to answer any other questions that the commissioners.
Are you refunding the outstanding bonds?
Oh, thank you. So the airport currently has enough cash accumulated in the PFC fund to pay off those old bonds, the 2006 and the 2008 bonds. So those will be paid off actually right around the time that the new bonds are being issued. So the lien of those existing bonds will be eliminated, and this will be a new bond issue going forward.
Susan, what's the amount of that?
So there's 2,430,000 of 2006 bonds and 1,530,000 of 2008 bonds. So a little over $4 million, plus you have some reserve funds on hand with the trustees.
So for instance, since we're going to need additional dollars for the project, does it make any sense to use that money for the project and just roll these into the new one?
Well, I can definitely look into that, but because those other bonds, or the existing bonds, have the first lien on the PFC revenue, we have to restructure them, and we thought the most economic way was to redeem them. But I will take a look.
And I don't disagree with that, it's just that if we're going to have to come up with probably what I'm seeing, $4 to $5 million additionally if we're going to do this or value engineer out. So that may be impossible for some additional, but just an idea for if we have to.
Well, so leaving you some extra cash on hand, do you mean, to?
Well, otherwise we have to take it from the fund balance to
Right.
the project.
Right,
So it's just
okay,
an option, but
sure.
it's something you can look at in greater detail. It's just an option to know if it's possible or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you explain, you mentioned something about provisions in case there's a downturn in revenues. Could you go over that again, please?
So because the PFC stream is kind of a passive revenue for you, you have no control over how many passengers come in and out, you have no control over the amount of tickets that are PFC eligible, and you have no control over the economy and other factors that affect enplanements. So we typically structure the bonds to provide somewhere a little bit close to 2 times the amount of PFC revenue projected to the debt service, so that if something were to happen, say a 9/11 or the 2008 financial crisis, there would still be enough PFC revenue, even with a significant drop in payments, to make sure your debt service is paid, and you would have enough revenue to do that. I mean, when we look back at 2008, you would have needed about 635,000 passengers to pay your debt service. And now you're at, PFC eligible passengers, and now you're, well over 1 million. So there's a significant cushion there. So what's at risk in that instance is your pay-as-you-go money.
Any other questions?
Is the feasibility study done?
The airport consultant has provided a draft, but it's, I think a second draft is coming out soon, so it's not complete at the moment.
And also, I think it'd be very helpful for everyone to get the link for the preliminary official statement as soon as it's finished.
Right, that is not completed yet.
I understand it's about 30 days, 15 to 30 days away.
Right.
Other questions? Tom?
No questions from you, Mr. Chairman?
Are we ready to proceed?
Yep, we are. I don't know if we're looking for a motion or if this was primarily discussion, but it probably would be bad for the commission to weigh in to say we space on the back of the,
Immediately back. It would have been a modular structure. We anticipated at some point in the phasing that we might need that. But we
that's,
feel,
but a permanent office space?
No,
Or would that be
it-
temporary during?
it would be temporary, and we were hopefully going to just keep it as permanent. But we built out the Golden Complex, about 4,000 square feet, and that's working well, and they've been fully occupied, and so we have extra space.
But
that's not related.
So that's different.
That Bona build-out was phase one of the entire project. We did that for the anticipation of this.
So let's go back for just a second on the ticket modernization bond financing, accepting the bid and moving forward.
Well, first of all, I think just want to make it clear, is by doing this, what is anticipated we're going to have to take from roughly from the airport's fund balance. Because we've got X amount of financing and we have a bid that's come back significantly. So the difference is, I understand it's more than $1.7 million.
It's 6.7.
6.7, so you're taking $7 million out of your fund balance. Now, that makes me very nervous. I'm not certain that you're just going to do this without a little more analysis. I mean, the question is, do you want to value engineer, do you want to remove some components? I'm not suggesting we do or don't. Just want to make sure everyone's aware that if we go forward as it is, you're going to be significantly driving down your fund balance.
I agree with Dr. Reddy, and I always thought the plan was to refinance the outstanding bonds. I mean, I've been, I had brought up many times before that there were other ways to finance those bonds. I think we're currently at 6.5%. And I agree, refinancing them at 3% is a great idea, and having cash on hand, I mean, God knows what's going to happen with our economy with tariff wars, possible war with Iran, everything else that could potentially happen. I'd strongly suggest, if I was doing the bond issue, I'd definitely do the refunding and have the flexibility of having cash in hand.
Other thoughts, questions, comments?
Would that reduce what needs to be taken out of the fund balance?
Yes. If you have about $3.5 million in bonds, it would increase the size of the bond issue. You still have the revenue to pay for them. That's not a question, but you're going to increase your fund balance. And one of the ways that you're evaluated as an airport by the rating agencies, these bonds will be rated, correct?
Yes,
An A.
in that category, yes.
Is your fund balances, and particularly since we're a seasonal airport, fund balances are critically important.
So as Dr. Reddy had mentioned, to take a look at how much cash could be, surplus cash could be generated by including the refunding. And my estimate is about 2.6 million of the 4.5 million that you're, that is available, or is the pay-as-you-go project. Now 720,000 of that is actually already related to the ticket win project. So it would be out of the 2.6 million, if I'm able to free up that much extra cash flow, that would allow you to reimburse, about $2 million, or generate about $2 million to add to your 416 funds, which is 9.6. Instead of the local funds being 6.7 million, it could possibly be, only 4.7 million. Take it from your.
Is there any downside to that?
I don't think so. I just have to work it into the cash flow model.
3% money's best money around.
If I were doing it in my city, I would, it's a no-brainer, I'd refinance those at 3% and have the cash on hand.
But again, it's only going to generate about $2.6 million of cash, because that's.
That's all we got.
That remaining $4 million would not be taken out all at once, right? Over time.
No, it's going to be cash on the barrelhead pretty much, once the project gets going. It'll go probably a 2-year period. Year and a half at least. But what I think, Mr. Chairman, if I may, and again, there's no rush to make this decision. This isn't going to council until July. What I plan on doing, and you may have, if you want the benefit of this for your next meeting, is a thorough analysis of, what components maybe do you not want to exclude and the pros and cons of each. And you may not want to do any, but I think it's good to be able to articulate what those are, these additional funding mechanisms, and potentially, if there's potentially a general fund component, just a sort of deeper dive on the review. So that's what I'm going to do before I take it to City Council, and I'm happy to provide all that for you for your next meeting, because again, there's no obviously rush to make any decision today. But I think this is a good starting point.
Makes sense, I think that's good.
Are there, you mentioned value engineering, are there some, do we know now, are there some possibilities of cutting back right now, but being able to build back in down the line?
Sure, like for example, the additional modular, explain that.
Well, the modular, we're already looking at doing a deduct, we don't think we need.
Well, the modular was how much?
650.
And is that's in there?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a modular for what specifically?
Temporary space during the construction phase.
Yeah, I mean, so there's things like that. I just think that we just need to be able to analyze it at a deeper level, and give you a wide range of recommendation and menu items, and then it's easier to get your arms around this recommendation for the city council.
Is this something that should go to the committee?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just Sunday, we should pass the budget, we need to think about it. And you've got some information that you would provide that to David.
Well, yeah, I think we need to have a series of meetings and do some significant analysis of this before your next airport commission will get you the information.
Well,
And laid out in a very well-drafted explanatory staff report before the meeting.
Okay. So
Well, I guess what I'd like to do is craft a staff report that's going to go to city council for your benefit, that has everything you need to know.
So when would you have some of that information available so we can schedule the committee meeting accordingly?
By the next meeting, I would think.
No, I know it has to be part of that.
Yeah, I think we should just calendar at least 2 to 3 subcommittee meetings. We may not need all of them, but we get them calendared, and it puts the burden on us to get work done.
Next week.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So they interview me. Okay. All right. Moving forward, airport concession program. Just verifying that we move on to the next week. John is chair of the operations committee, and the committee met and had a chance to sit in for a discussion. So John, the floor is yours to report that.
Well, first of all, a bit of summary. Just to remind ourselves, we have 2 prime concession areas right now, one for food and beverage, one for retail. They've been in place going on 20 years, and the concession agreements will expire at the end of October. And so it will be incumbent upon the airport to go out and look for new concessions. As part of that, the condo, which is the on-call financial consultant, was called on to take a look at the concession program, to evaluate it, to establish goals for an enhanced program, and to look at perhaps additional areas in the concourses for concession opportunities. So we first met as a committee on the 17th of April, and we had a fairly lively discussion for about an hour and a half reviewing the Recondo report. Unfortunately, we didn't have a quorum, and so there was no way to put things on the table and vote on them. However, the members present did fully agree and concur with Recondo recommendations. And we did finally meet this last Monday, and we did finally have a quorum, and we also had a fairly lively discussion. And it was not an hour and a half. In fact, I think it was about less than an hour. But we had 3 motions on the table, and they were unanimously passed. One motion was to extend the existing concession agreements beyond the end of October to the 1st of May next year to get us through the season and at least what we forecast to be the start of the new concession agreements. So we made a motion, and it was unanimously passed. The second had to do with the contracting method. We currently have 2 primes, but there are a number of other contracting methods available. One being a master, which really would only be 1 prime. And what the industry has done up to this point is pretty much divided food and beverage and retail, because there are companies out there that focus on one or the other. Recently, more and more companies are starting to do both. But for competition and to cater to the separation of food and beverage and retail, we were looking at the potential again of 2 primes or a hybrid. And that takes maybe 2 packages plus a third. The third would be carving out either a small area or a small package, which might attract a local bidder. And that contracting approach is called hybrid. So it has primes and again a smaller package. That doesn't guarantee that there will be local input because through FAA regs, it's got to be open to everyone. But there's the hope that local content can be brought in both as maybe a sub to one of the primes and maybe as part of this smaller package. So I had a motion on that, and that also passed unanimously for the hybrid approach. And then the third motion dealt with the amount of space that Recondo identified across the terminal, across the concourses. And their recommendation was that we look at an additional 7,600 square feet of concession space. And they identified a number of areas that we could make available to the bidders on the concession agreements. We're not dictating or mandating any of those spaces, but we're making them available for additional concession opportunities and obviously the opportunity for us to gain additional revenue. There's one area that I don't know that we were fully aware of before. It sits behind Starbucks, and it's a central area on the movement between both concourses, and it could accommodate, frankly, much of the 7,600 square feet. That's the amenity area that you see, which Tom could probably point out. And you don't see it because there's hoarding behind Starbucks, but it's a very large area. And I think everyone on the committee was pretty excited about some of the opportunities that we put into the amenity area. So the third motion, which again passed unanimously, was to accept Recondo's recommendation for the additional 7,600 square feet. We didn't take a look at a number of other factors. These were really the most important going into the bidding process.
Anyone else on the committee that would want to add to that or comments?
I think ever so briefly, on the first motion to extend the existing contract, we felt it was fair to the existing contractors, because they have a plan ahead. They have to purchase stock, there's storage, there's all sorts of things that they have to do. We talked about a month to month, which didn't really work out, so we wanted to give them a comfort zone to be able to provide ongoing business. And the second thing that Tom mentioned, this was the motion too, is, maybe you can help me with the figures, is there's a dollar figure per passenger. But sometimes it gets so rushed that dollar figure spent per passenger in retail or food shrinks because there's lines, there's no space, there's a lot of activity happening, and it's like they go by the shop and it's like, oh, well, there's a line there, I'm not gonna go in and shop. If there was a more relaxed, larger atmosphere like this, there would be more time to actually go in and look at the facilities and spend. So that goes through the things that I can know.
The other members of the committee, yeah, well,
So a number of these other recommendations that were part of the report, would that also be considered in the bidding process and as an opportunity for whoever is bidding on this, or is it focused only on that one area that was identified?
No, there are, if you go through the report, and the report was distributed so often, there are a number of drawings
Right.
that identify areas that could be made available.
Right, but
And so
there are
it's
also
not just
recommendations
individual.
for making changes in certain areas in regards to cooking facilities, storage facilities, whatever. Would that all be addressed as part of the bidding process?
Yes.
other members of the committee or other members of the commission have questions? Okay, well, I think we need, this is an action item, is it not?
It is, sir, yes.
So, do you want to offer a motion now?
Well, if there's one that
There was one?
It's a recommendation.
Okay. Yeah, you all received that yesterday. Did you all receive this yesterday? It was around 5:30. This is sent out, so I don't know if you had a chance to look at it. Do you need minutes?
Well, Mr. Chairman, again, what I would just offer, there's not going to be any action by council on this before your next meeting. It was a pretty large decision, and I don't know if you've actually seen the full report.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, we have, they'll have.
Well, if you want to move this to your next meeting, there's no issue with that, but if you're comfortable with it.
Yeah, I think we're comfortable on this, David, only because the committee has met twice, even the first time they were short of a quorum. They met again the second time I attended. It was vetted in fairly great lengthy detail, and I think the report was fairly good. And we'll start with questions. Start Swirl and go down. 1, 2, 3.
Well, it just, part
Here.
of the report, did not talk about language, but that was not part of the report to begin with. So I advised that we should consider asking for how an airport lounge, not airline specific, but just a general airport lounge, will play here at this airport.
Yeah, Guillermo was suggesting for that, the area that was known there as the amenity. I think the outcome of the discussion though was to leave that up to those who would be bidding, if I recall the conversation correctly.
That is correct. If we line out the potential opportunities,
Right.
at least from the airport
Right.
viewpoint,
Right.
we could always put that in.
Not as a requirement, but as something
that a
consideration.
bidder might consider.
Right.
So in the report, there's this, looks like you're taking out the central fountain and a large area out of the.
In the Bono, in the Bono.
Is that part of, was that, so that's all going to be?
That didn't articulate, the chairman, we had a discussion about that.
Yes. Jan can respond.
We took a look at that, and there are certainly some problems with doing that, and that has to do with passenger flow. Because there currently are three entrances into the gate areas, and put them back. If you close that up, then what you're doing is you're forcing passenger flow through the signs, and during peak, that could be problematic. So what we decided to do was this needs a bit more analysis. I think that area would have perhaps great potential for a concessionaire coming on board. But it needs to be weighed against certainly emergency evacuation considerations, as well as passenger flow. So I don't know that we're in a position to recommend that or not.
That's my point.
That was your point as well? Okay, well,
Yeah, that's why, question, I'm a little bit confused about the process. And with these recommendations that the report, I think, was a very good report, has a lot of recommendations in it. And I wasn't part of the meeting, so I don't know exactly what detail those recommendations were discussed. But as to the process and the selection of the bidding parties, does that become part of the criteria for the bid, that they need to address all of these recommendations, or is it just on the basis of existing concessions and how they would manage those?
Well, they will be given the current concession areas. When the RFPs go out, there will be a number of these areas that are identified where a concessionaire can come in and do something.
But who's making that decision? Is that the airport, or is that?
Well, actually, the committee made the decisions. They identified the central area as the key area for new. It's over 7,000 square feet. It's probably almost double that. So in the RFP, it will identify you could build new in this area. You could put a stage with music on it. You could have a barber shop, all variety. And typically what's done in the industry is it leaves it up to the concessionaires to compete with each other for concepts. And that's where the synergism for local participation comes in, is one company may have 3 local companies to do different things for that whole project. But physical space, like Jan articulated, would be the existing concessions to refresh them and build them out within the existing confines. And secondly, to take this large, unusually large, centralized space and they would do all the capital investment. That investment in itself would dictate really the length of the term to advertise.
and it would be their investment as well.
But what we don't want to do is turn the airport into a Las Vegas, or some airports are so overdone with concessions, you won't be able to move.
But we wouldn't anticipate growth at the airport at the same time.
For example, if you take a look at the regional concourse, you see areas right in the middle of the concourse, and we didn't think that would work at all. Again, because of seating and passenger flow.
What is that yellow box?
That's the future expansion of the regional, that's reflected in the ACIP. And when that happens, we're going to need more flow through that area. If Southwest were to announce service in the next ensuing years, regional concourse is going to be an extremely busy place.
Norman?
Well, I would move the 3 items, which is sort of the backbone of this, and there's obviously decisions that we made down, as Ralph points out, but these 3 provide the guidance necessary now.
So you're making a motion for the 3 items that were distributed last night. Again, just for the record, and to respond, David, to your question too, this was very thoroughly presented to the commission in terms of the full report, and then the committee's, Jan's committee, spending probably 3 hours on it in detail going through. So I feel very comfortable that we can move forward with this, and I think there's a lot more on this. Is there a second to?
Second.
Okay, Jan has seconded it. How about further discussion, questions?
I just wanted to say, the chairman, excellent job, but one thing when you were talking about the fountain area, and you said, I think, that was the consensus of the whole committee.
And if you're not familiar with some of the space, next time you fly in and out, just go up. I mean, it gives you a better sense, particularly in busy times. Up there, I rarely fly out of that one, and mine are always out of the regional terminal.
I would like to make one additional comment for, in the ensuing years, let's assume this is a 5 to 10 year agreement.
Right.
If in 3 years, the concessionaire says, well, we've been here for 3 years now, we think we could do a zip-zap in this area, and if it is conducive to the operational, this commission and the city council can say, yes, we will amend the agreement, we'll lease them the space, because once they're here. We did that with the, up on the Bono Concourse on the right, when the food and beverage concessionaire said, this is a losing proposition. They abandoned it, and the gift shop concessionaire took it over, and it's yielding about 1.2 million gross a year. So that's the great part of this whole relationship.
And we have that flexibility.
And kiosks as well, and so forth.
Any other comments, questions? Call for the question. And it's the 3 recommendations that you received last night. Were they also handed out this morning? I don't know if anybody needs them, but you received them in the mail. Does anybody not have them? I mean, I can read them if you need me to read them. Should I read them for just the record? The first motion is to extend the current concession agreements until May 1st, 2020 to account for the transition of the new program to not disrupt the season. That was moved by Commissioner Keating and seconded by Commissioner Call from the subcommittee. The second is to select a more flexible hybrid formula contract approach option from the consultant's report. That was moved by Commissioner King and seconded by Commissioner Reason. And the third is to expand the existing concession space by at least 7,600 square feet within the enlarged new central area in order to increase revenues. And I don't think we want to lose sight of the fact that this is revenue generating for the airport. It was also moved by Commissioner King and seconded by Commissioner Berriman. So those are the 3. And Norm, your recommendation, your motion is to adopt all 3, but not to do it serially. So we have a second. Did you have a question? Was a question, Jan?
No, I second.
Oh, you second, okay. Then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Passed unanimously. Airport budget.
Right.
Oh, I thank you, yes, you reminded me. When does the budget go before the city council?
The airport budget is on
It's the 22nd.
Just as a preliminary, they won't be deciding until the first meeting in June 6th.
Okay, so it'll go to full print as an information, but the actual decision won't be until June 6th. Okay, great. Thank you, I did that. Thank you for reminding me. All right, but who's taking lead on that one?
I've been doing a lot of talking.
Mark?
Well, let's just, we've had some.
Kind of an update, right?
Yeah, it is an update, so let's just go, because last month we talked about a lot of the details on our maintenance and operating budget. So I think now you have to go to the capital page, let's talk about the key changes that have occurred since the last, so here we have.
Let me talk in specific, we're going into capital, what is happening here. We received a letter from the state water board. All airports in California received a letter within the last month and a half. The letter specifically directs airports, it's an order, it's an order, and it directs airports to analyze their grounds to see if the foam used for aircraft rescue and firefighting has had any potential influence on the subsurface, the soils, and potentially water. This went to all airports statewide. It came out of left field, and all airports are expeditiously trying to react to this. We reacted to it. We hired a consultant who was creating the order, requested a full work plan report, and that is essentially in draft, and that will go out on deadline. And what the work plan, without getting into great deal, this, again, this just came out of the blue. This was something premeditated. that if there is any type of potential environmental concerns with the use of that foam, which is very minimal, mind you, that there may be some remedial action required. And that is a field that I'm simply not well versed enough. The consultant at this point isn't sure. So what we did as a placeholder mark was to put in an additional $500,000 in the capital program under an item called California Water Board Compliance Plan as a placeholder in case there is, well, there's going to be some expenditure. The question is to what extent. So we think that is a prudent thing based on what we know today. So that was just a great surprise. Secondly, the renovations are phase one to add one additional security lane by next season. And we're going to do that by a change order to the existing ticketing lane project. And we're actually going to budget an additional $450,000 to bring the total to $800,000. Because of I think it alludes a lot to the construction atmosphere right now, especially in the Coachella Valley for smaller projects, the availability and so forth. Lastly, hold room seating. We all agree budgetarily that we're going to outfit the Bogo Concourse with all new seating. That's going according to plan. We feel that the regional concourse, in the event there is added airline service, and there's likely going to be added airline service in ensuing years, that an additional approximately 100 seats, Ulysses? Approximately, yes. Approximately 100 seats. That will bring that amount to from $550,000 to $650,000. Mark, take it from there as far as the summary of funding.
Well, those were the highlights, and in addition to that, we incorporated the recommendations and motion that the Airport Commission made last month to increase the parking rates and take that to council for them to consider that, also to adjust the airline rates and charges, and then as we do the RFP or the amendment for the concessions to increase their percentage of gross to the airport as well, to make sure we get to the current market rates. Currently, we're getting about 8% from food and beverage. Market rates are closer to the 12% range across the airports that we look at industry-wide. The other thing that we are suggesting doing, since we did have a good year, revenues came in over $1 million over our budget, and expenses were under what we had budgeted. We had set aside in the budget $200,000 for the additional PERS exposure, and we're suggesting that we actually set aside and reserve $950,000 for that future cost, so that as those funds are paid off early, that we have the money set aside to do that. And in addition, on the AIP page, on the grant page, this page right here, the budget for the AIP grant from 19 and 2020, we're increasing that by about $2.5 million. We're maximizing all the entitlement funds we have available so that those dollars could be available for the takeaway project if necessary. So those are the primary changes to the budget that we had seen from last month, and we'd entertain any questions.
Mark, I thought we had added $150,000 to begin the landscape conversion program.
Yes, we did.
And where is that?
Good question.
It's somewhere in the budget, but
it's actually.
We're going to live with that once?
We put it in the land side account.
Okay.
The budget hasn't changed from what we recommended, we're just getting an update on some of the revenue and other things. Yes, sir.
I just have a general comment. In future, I think it would be helpful for the commission if you could flag all the changes so that we don't have to go through every line item and it becomes clear. If that's possible.
Just highlight and different colors.
And also the revision control. It would be good if, it said version 1.2 or something like that. Because
Just keep it
several of these have come out.
Sure.
That's helpful, yeah, just to keep track. Because we know this is fluid. We know it's a 2-year budget, which is a new thing for us. But we keep getting updated.
So when we had our discussion last time, when we substantially increased the parking fees, part of that was to offset the fees that the airlines had to pay to keep us competitive.
Right.
So where are we? We know the airline fees are going up. What are the landing fees or per passenger fee now?
We
Or
have-
under, that's being proposed?
So currently, the cost per enplanement is probably the simplest metric to measure it. We're at about $5.20, and the proposal in the budget, as we had talked about, would take that to $5.80 next year, and then $6 per enplane passenger for the year 2021. So that's roughly a 15% increase, spread over the board with their various rates and charges. And in many cases, as we mentioned in the committee meeting, their square footage rates are certainly under what other tenants are paying. So we just want to bring those up to be a par with other tenants in the area.
I guess I would remind Commissioners too, we went through this in pretty extensive detail at the last meeting.
Right.
And all of that information was provided to us too, if you want to pull out as a reference.
But as the stuff is moved around, I just want to make sure that we're still substantially less than our competitor.
Correct.
Yeah, it hasn't really changed any of that. Really, it's more revenue projections. Expense that provides us an opportunity. Yeah, we really vetted that in great detail last meeting, so I think we have a pretty good handle. But if ever we need to review that, I mean, we can pull up that information again and go through. But I think there's a couple of suggestions just to number as version one, whatever. So I get them at home too, so I can be sure I have them correctly and then highlight the changes if it does make a sense.
So, to that point, I mean, as far as flagging, with the original one that was part of the packet, then we got a revision, then we got a revision 2. Looking at the projected reserve fund balance, 19 and 20, it starts out at 6.1. In the revised version, it goes to 7.2, then it goes back down to 7.0. And for 2021, it goes all the way up to 9.4. Just top line, what is the major impact or the major reason for that change?
It just depends on how much local money we are going to be using on our PFC ticket wing project, on the ticket wing expansion.
That's what you factored in here.
Right.
So what was that assumption?
Well, it was based on probably the most conservative approach that we would need to use an additional $3 million of local money to set aside for the ticket wing project. So there's various factors, I think we mentioned when we were on that project, there's various things that are still going to change. As we move forward with this draft budget, in order to get something that's reasonable to council, this factors in probably those most conservative approaches. We would expect to exceed this, or I guess underspend our expenses that we have in the budget and come in under some of the other estimates. But we try to lay out the most conservative approach that we put before you.
Right.
So that's a 10% you saw earlier.
Right.
Thank you.
Other questions? This is not an action item, so.
Just an update.
Yeah, just an update. So I'm going to make sure there's no other questions before. We get an update at every meeting because this is fluid. So we're going to go down to the executive director and staff reports.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, the ticketing we covered is thorough. Part of our ACIP, Airport Capital Improvement Program, included acquisition of 2 new firefighting trucks, and we're working on that project to get those acquired. The passenger boarding bridges is also on our ACIP. We're going to make sure that those old units are functional and fully reliable. So that's an AIP project we're also working on. Pavement condition inventory is another federal project funded by the federal government. And that pavement condition inventory needs to be done, and we'll be doing that through our consulting, one of our 3 consulting agreements. We talked a little bit about the checkpoint. I know things are moving fast and it gets a little complicated, but 2 phases. Number 1, if all goes well by this season, we would have added by change order an additional amount of space to add 1 additional TSA lane to bring it to 6. And then the longer term plan, that 1.7 million in the alternate, will bring it the potential of anywhere to 7 to 8 in the longer term, which is very, very good because things change. And I brought you up to speed on the water board letter, and Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you, thank you. Any questions of Tom? How about any commissioner requests, reports?
I want to put on my hat as the chairman of the information desk volunteers. They've just concluded the season schedule and have started a summer schedule, which is just 2 shifts a day. During season, we had 61 volunteers, active volunteers, who put in 3,825 hours, valued at $25.43 an hour. That works out to be over $97,000 that the volunteers contributed to the airport.
And I think the minutes should reflect that detail. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's very good. Very good, thank you.
Wonderful job.
Any other commissioner requests or reports? Report of council actions.
We'll be taking most of these items to council over the next couple of months.
Lots
With
gonna
recommendations.
happen. Lots gonna happen.
Norm, your last chance.
I've said enough today.
Any correspondence? No correspondence. Receive and file? Yeah. Right, we don't have the activity. So, I guess we're down to adjourn. Anyone want to move adjournment?
So moved.
Second. We are adjourned.